Hi, good afternoon. Okay, we seem to be live. Welcome to this. Is going to be on here the Accsoon Cineview Master 4K. So this is a wireless video transmitter. This is the transmitter. The receiver's here on my desk. And this can transmit either HD or 4K at up to 60 frames per second wirelessly between the transmitter and the receiver. So I wanted to have a look at it, see what's different perhaps between this and some of the other similar products that are on the market. When you buy it, it comes in a nice little box, and included in the box is obviously the transmitter and the receiver. As well as that, you get a couple of little, these are like cold shoe mounts, two of those, and a couple of cables for lightning on an iPhone or iPad, and USB-C as well. And we'll have a look at what you can do with those in a little bit. So let's have a closer look at the device transmitter. Um, Let me go to the other camera for a second. We can see a bit more closely. I'm going to plug it in while I'm doing this, so it will boot up. So if we look at this side of it here, you can see you have, let's start at the top, at the front actually. You've got four antennas on the top because this is a tri-band device. The antennas on the top are for 2.5G Wi-Fi bands, the usual Wi-Fi bands. Then there are two more antennas that stick out from the side, and these antennas are for the 6 gigahertz band. So we have three bands, and it will automatically use the band that gives the best signal. Coming round to this side here, we can see it's just booting and starting up now. There's a power button. There's a small OLED screen, and once this starts up, you'll be able to see that this will have all of the information about the device's status. A single control wheel, so this rotates and you can push, and then a little back button at the bottom to go back in the menu. So there we are. It's now just started up. It's in tri-band mode. It's in group number 6, and it's chosen automatically channel 118. Now, to connect the transmitter to the receiver is just here, is really very, very easy, provided both are set to the same group. They will connect and they will talk to each other. So there's only really one thing that you need to do to get them to talk to each other. Is a fan in these because they are capable of doing 4K at 60 frames per second. Apparently, the processors in these can also do up to 8K, but I've never really noticed the noise from the fan at all, actually. It only comes on when it needs it, and it is very quiet. If we come round to this side of the device, you'll see that we have an SDI input. Now, that's a 3G SDI input, so that only goes, as far as I can tell at least, to HD at up to 30 frames per second. So that's basically an HD input on SDI, but then we also have an HDMI input with an HDMI output, a loop through, and this will go up to 4K, 60 frames per second. There's also a USB-C port here, and the USB-C provides a video out, and it allows you to plug the transmitter into an iPhone or iPad to use the iPhone or iPad as a low latency, high quality monitor. It's quite a useful function. On the back, we have the compartment here where you can put an NPF style battery, Sony NPF battery, and it's a pretty standard low cost battery. I'm actually running this off a V-mount battery with 12 volts in, and it will go from 7.4 to 16.8 volts. So very, very wide input range. Now, currently I've got nothing plugged into it. If I plug in my HDMI cable here into there, it will tell me what's going in. It's currently saying no input. Not sure why. That is my in, isn't it? Let me just make sure I'm actually sending something to it. And it's decided not to recognize the input. Oh, the delights of doing live. It could be my HDMI cable, or it could be a few other things. It is on the input side. I've been using this all day playing with it, and I've not had this problem before. There we go. Now it's recognized it. So we have the 1080p 30, 29.97 coming into it. And then if we look at this wider shot here, I've got the monitor here in the background, and I've actually got the direct feed from my decklink on this side of this monitor, and then I've got the feed from the wireless transmitter there. Because one of the things that I really wanted to understand about this device is the latency. That's the delay between the input and then the output, the receiving end. Because if you want to use something like this for pulling focus with a wireless follow focus, if there's too much delay between the actual picture and what you see on the screen, it makes pulling focus very difficult because you'll always be slightly behind the curve. So what I did this earlier on because it was too complicated to set up for live, was I've got a Blackmagic decklink card here in my edit suite. I created a 60 frames per second file. Let me just bring it up on the screen so you'll be able to see what I did. So I created this file, and it has a timecode number on it, and this goes in 1 frame intervals. And then what I did was fed this to the input of the transmitter. I took the output of the receiver to the monitor on one side of the monitor, and at the same time, I took the direct output of the decklink device to the monitor. So we had a direct feed and a feed via the transmitter, then play the 60 frames per second. So I did this in HD, played the 60 frames per second HD file, and then you can see the delay between the actual original and the output monitor. And to be honest, when I was just looking at it with my own eyes, I was really struggling to see any latency at all, really struggling. So I then videoed the monitor. It's a very crude way of doing it, all happening at 60 frames per second. So I could actually freeze frame it and look at those timecode numbers to see what the difference was. So I'm going to show you the recordings that I made. So you have to bear with me a second. I just need to turn off the overlay, the timecode overlay, the data burn in, that is, so that you can see the correct thing. Right. So this is what I recorded. It's a bit shaky because it's handheld when I shot the 2 monitors. It was all shot at 60 frames per second. And if I do freeze frame this, it's actually a little bit difficult to see because of the interaction between the shutter speed of the camera and of the, so you're looking at the wrong one, the interaction of the shutter speed of the camera and the way I filmed it. But if we look at the frame, so on the left with the green box is the original, on the right without the green box is via the wireless link, you can see that on average there's about a 1.5 frame delay, something like that. So I've got 688 on the left, and I've got 686/7 on the right. So that's saying about a 1.5 frame delay. And I found that consistently, when I did this, looking at the latency delay through the device, that was what I was getting. And if I stop here, you can see it's a 6.7 on the left, and then it looks like it's maybe a 4.5 on the right. So again, about 1.5 frames. If I do it here, we've got a 4.1 and possibly a 3.9. So 1.5, maybe 2 frame delay through the system at 60 frames per second in HD. And that's actually fast enough for pulling focus because your own reaction times are probably around a frame anyway. And to be honest, you're going to have some latency in monitors and things like that anyway. So it's very, very difficult to have a truly zero latency system. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, that 1.5 frames at 60 frames per second is basically going to mean a no frame delay or less than a frame delay, because 1 frame at 60 is a fraction of 1 frame at 24. So the delay will be sub 1 frame at 24. At 30 frames per second, it's not even going to be a frame again. It's going to be sub 1 frame. 60 frames per second, then you're going to have that 1.5, maybe 2 frames at times. It varies a little bit depending on the exact settings in the transmitter. But really, in terms of latency, if you're using HD for focus pulling, it's absolutely fine. So then I went on to test the 4K performance because we want to know how this performs in 4K. And that actually really surprised me. So I did a similar test. I struggled a little bit more to get 4K 60 into the monitor. I couldn't actually get 4K 60 side by side on the monitor because the monitor won't allow me to do that. So what I had to do is a slightly different setup. And if I show you this here, you'll get an idea of what I did. So on the left, I've got my laptop. The laptop is feeding a Blackmagic Design. What is it? It's an Ultra Studio 4K. So that's creating a 4K HDMI output that's going into the transmitter. You can see the transmitter in the middle of the desk. Now I've also got the transmitter plugged in using the USB-C to Lightning cable to my iPhone. And I'm using the iPhone as the monitor using the Accsoon app. I'll show you that in a minute. And then the receiver is plugged into the larger monitor on the right-hand side. And so this now is at 30, this was at, if I remember right, this was at 30 frames per second. But at 30 frames per second, if we look at this frame here, we can see that on the laptop, it says 142. On the phone, it says 140. There's a 2-frame delay there. Now, I suspect that at least one of those frames is the delay between the laptop and the Blackmagic Ultra Studio. There's going to be a delay there. It's not instant. It normally is about a frame. So the signal that's actually arriving at the transmitter is actually probably the 40 signal. And then if we look at the monitor on the right, you can see that typically, where we go there, we've got what, 4, 6 on the phone and 4, 5, potentially 4, 6 on the monitor. The actual delay is actually around about a frame or less. So the latency isn't actually all that different to the 4K. Now, of course, because this is 30 frames per second, in terms of frames, the delay is fewer. It's about a frame. Whereas in HD at 60 frames per second, we were seeing that 1.5 frames. So even in 4K, the latency at around about a frame, or maybe just a little less than a frame, is really very, very good with this device. So I wouldn't really have any qualms about using it for focus point. Perhaps the only negative side to 4K is having to use the HDMI input and output. And most monitors on their HDMI have a little bit of lag in the HDMI processing, so there's probably going to be another frame or so added in the monitor itself. So you probably end up with a couple of frames of latency, maybe a little bit more, depending on the monitor that you're using, and also how quickly the camera you're using is able to output that 4K HDMI. Again, there might be some latency there. So the bulk of the latency won't be from the transmitter and receiver, it will be from the camera and the monitor, and the transmitter in between should be very low latency. Now, there are things that you can do with the transmitter in terms of its setup. So if I go to here and we have a look, let me find an angle where the light isn't glaring. There we go. I turn the control knob here, we can see it's set to the EU region. This is my Wi-Fi and transmission information. And if I go to here, we can see that the input is currently 8264. We're encoding 1080. And I can go down here and I can change the bitrate, and I can change whether we have CBR or VBR. Now, in terms of image quality, I haven't really noticed a lot of difference whether you use CBR or VBR. But generally, when you lower the bit rate, which will give you a slight reduction in image quality, you get some very small minor improvements in the latency because there's simply less data that needs to be transmitted. But they're not huge differences. They don't make a vast difference. Now, the other question is range. How far will they go? So I've tested these outside in outdoors, and bear in mind that we're in the UK here in the EU settings, and in the EU, we have much lower Wi-Fi power levels than in the US in particular. They have a lot more power than we do. But even with the lower EU power levels, I got a good 300, 400 meters with it. And inside, certainly around my home and in the sort of space that I have here, it's gone everywhere I wanted it to. It doesn't go very well through walls, but then to be frank, nothing goes through well. A brick wall or a concrete wall will effectively stop the signal. But a dry wall or a wood wall will go through that, but it does get degraded and reduced in strength. But that's the same really with most video transmitters that are operating on these very high frequencies. So in terms of range, it's really sort of comparable to most of the other devices that are similar that I've used. And it performs perfectly satisfactory for the type of applications it's designed for, which will be remote focus pulling, remote monitoring, and things like that. Because of the low latency, you could also use this for a live streaming application or even a broadcast application streaming at 4K at higher quality when you've got a nice, good, strong signal. And I think that's one of the things that maybe sort of separates it from some of the other devices. So this is the normal Accsoon Cineview SE, really nice product, but this is HD. Has a little bit more latency, only a little more, but is limited to HD. Um, if you can stream or do that wireless link in 4K, even if you're going to be distributing your content in HD, when you downsample the 4K to HD, any compression artifacts, because these are compressed links, will be minimized. So I think there's a lot to be said for having the ability to do things at 4K if you want to. Now, the other thing that is really nice, I mentioned previously, so I'm going to go to the overhead camera, and I've got my iPad here, and I've got the Accsoon app running on my iPad, and we can, if you've come across the Accsoon CMO devices, they allow you to take the SDI or HDMI out of the camera and connect it directly into an iPad or iPhone to use it as a monitor. And the transmitter does the same thing. So if I plug this USB cable into the transmitter, and then I plug that into my rather old iPad here, we now have a nice monitor, and I can use this as a monitor. And at the moment, the picture looks a bit crushed and compressed because actually, if I'm just change the source, you can add a LUT. So I've got a LUT turned on here. That's with the LUT off. So this is S-Log3, currently coming from my edit suite over HDMI into the Accsoon. And you can load your own LUTs in here. I'm just using the Sony default S-Log3 LUT, adding that to this. And we have a very low latency, very high quality monitor using an iPad. You can buy an iPad actually like this one. This is a generation 6 iPad, so it is quite an old iPad. But you can buy one of these for about £75, $75, $80 on eBay and places like that. And it's a really cheap way to get a really nice monitor. You've got all the usual exposure tools. You've got waveform, histogram. You can have single color. You've got false color. You know, all of the tools that you would normally expect to find in a top quality Zebras, a top quality monitor in this. Very easy to load your own lookup tables and things like that. And if you have an iPhone, you could just use your iPhone as a monitor. And at the same time, we're also using this then to transmit that signal. So I could also, if I wasn't plugged in via the cable, I could connect to the receiver wirelessly, and I can view the output, the transmitted output, on the same iPad, iPhone, or an Android device, an Android tablet or phone as well as having the output from the receiver going to a monitor. There are limitations as to how many devices you can have plugged in at once. You'd have to have a look at the Accsoon website to get that information. There's various tables, depends on the resolution and things like that. But you can connect to multiple devices at the same time. So multiple people can be monitoring. You can record on the iPads or iPhones. So as a director's monitor, it means the director can potentially record on his iPad what you're shooting, so that he can review what you've shot completely independently of what you're doing. So you could be prepping for the next shot operator doing your lights or whatever, and the director can review the shots on the iPad in the meantime or check for anything like that. And I think it's a really nice way to work and a really useful thing. Of course, if you're using an iPad as the monitor, they have a very long battery life. You don't have to worry about having a separate receiver and a monitor and powering all of that to create a director's monitor. The iPad does a really good job. So overall, any questions? I don't see anybody asking any questions. I know there's not a huge number of people watching this right now live, but this will now go so people can watch it in the future. It's the Accsoon Cineview Master 4K. I really like it. It's a really nice device. I plan on using it in my mobile production unit that I'm building up to transmit 4K between cameras or HD at higher frame rates if that's what I need. So thank you for watching. There will be more of these live streams in the future. I'm going to take a break from live streaming for a little bit over a week because I'm off on a trip overseas. But do let me know if there's any other products you'd like me to look at. Thank you for watching.